Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take center stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Julie Ballard, founder of Carrot Clinical, Tiger Team Bio, and who's helped shape leading diagnostics companies like Genomic Health, Guardant, and GRAIL. We discuss what early stage founders get wrong when setting up CLIA labs, why LDT validation takes years and not months, and how hiring the wrong people can quietly derail your launch. Julie also shares her outlook on the future of diagnostics, innovation, and regulation. Welcome to the show, Julie. Thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you. Thank you for your time, especially we had some logistic problems on my side, so I appreciate you being patient. We're going to I'm excited about this one because I think this is a really interesting topic, and you've carved out a specialism within the industry, which is obviously a necessity and adds so much value to early stage companies. So I'm excited to get into the topic, but before we do that, it'd be great for you to introduce yourself and your career and everything you've been doing up until this point.
Sure. I'm Julie Ballard. I'm principal of Carrot Clinical, my own consulting firm, and I'm also a managing partner at Tiger Team. So thank you so much, David, for having me on here. Should I just jump right into my background and my journey?
Sure.
Okay, great. So I'm a clinical laboratory scientist by training, also called a CLS. So in California, you're required to be a licensed CLS in order to do any kind of medical diagnostic testing in clinical labs. Okay, so I started my career at Stanford Medical Center, working in the bone marrow transplant lab. So working in a very large established institution. I was there for about 3 or 4 years before the director of my CLS program told me about a startup opportunity, and I didn't know what that was about. It sounded interesting, so I went to interview um, and decided to join. This was Virologic, and I was the third CLS hired, 28th employee. So very different experience from Stanford, where it was just very big. Like went from a big institution to a place where I was talking to the CEO. The CEO knew my name. Okay. But I really enjoyed it there. I loved being able to help build the lab. Okay. And be able to participate in validation of the laboratory developed tests, our LDT. And because the company was so small, I got to work cross-functionally with a lot of people. And that was really fun and interesting to me. So after I was at Biologic for about 5 years, the same director who told me about this position then told me about another position, another startup. They were looking for a supervisor, a CLS supervisor to help build the lab. And at the time, I thought, well, I don't know if I really want to supervise. But then I also was thinking, well, how will I know unless I actually try? And when I interviewed, I absolutely loved everybody. I left the interview feeling totally energized. And so I decided to join this company. It was Genomic Health. Going there was absolutely the best decision I ever made career-wise. I was there for a total of 10 years to help um, build the lab operations, the quality program, and the regulatory compliance piece. So again, I was there for 10 years. And at that point, Genomic Health had become pretty big and successful. I think we were about 800 people when I really started to miss the fast-paced startup environment. So I decided to leave. And from there, I went to Toma, Guardant Health, GRAIL, and SEER, all with the responsibility related to lab operations, quality programs, and the regulatory compliance, getting the required credentials in place. So had been doing this for about 20 years, really enjoyed it, but was also a little bit burnt out after 6 startups. Okay, so when 2020 came around, and it was COVID year. Um, I've been thinking about consulting up to that point, but what really pushed me was everything that happened during that year. So as a CLS, we're often in demand. There's always a shortage
Mm.
of CLS, especially in California. We're often getting calls from recruiters. Okay, what was different in 2020 was that instead of the usual calls from reference labs and hospitals, there were recruiters from places like Amazon. Okay, because Amazon wanted to build a CLIA lab to do COVID testing. And while I didn't
Mm.
necessarily want to go to another startup environment, I thought there might be an opportunity here. And that summer, we were shelter in place. So I spent that whole summer figuring out how to start a business, how to build a website, how to get a business license, how to become my own IT person. Okay. And as I was talking to my mentors about all of this, there was interest in hiring me. And so I thought, if I don't do this now, when will I? And so that October, I decided to quit my job and went all in on the
Wow.
consulting. Yeah. So 5 years later, which was when I started, was one of the milestones I wanted to meet. So we're almost at October as of this recording, which will be our Carrot's 5 year anniversary. So I'm very happy about that. And the other thing I'm starting now, in addition to working on Carrot, is um, starting this new adventure, Tiger Team Bio, with one of your previous guests, Tara Madala.
Lovely. We all love Tara. Um, Thank you for that, Julie. You've covered a lot. I mean, you haven't just done 6 startups. You did Genomic Health, Guardant, and GRAIL. You know, some of the biggest names in the industry. What an incredible amount of experience you must have pulled from being on the inside of each. But I guess just out of my own curiosity, when you worked for those 3 names, were they like completely different in their sort of culture and approach? Or do you feel there was sort of like a golden thread of how those 3 really successful companies, you know, really went about things, and you could sort of see that, you know, actually the companies that succeed tend to have the, you know, the sort of consistency and common traits of success running through them?
I would say the culture for the three were quite different.
Mm.
Um, so at Genomic Health, so when I was at Genomic Health, this was in the early 2000s. So I started around 2003.
Mm.
And the I was at Genomic Health for 10 years, so I was able to see the product from development to when we were able to launch, and then many years of it out on the market. So I had a much longer experience there. Okay,
Mm.
with the investment environment was also different there. So we had a little bit more time to work on the test, to make sure that we had a really robust test that would really help patients before it went out to market. And and Kim and Tara, your previous guest on Genomic Health, touched on this a little bit, but there were one of the things about Genomic Health that was at the forefront of everything was all about patient first. Okay. I remember after we tested the first Oncotype DX breast patient, they actually had her come in to speak to the company. And I think they had her at this point. I was gone from Genomic Health, but I think when during the 20th anniversary of Oncotype DX, they had her come back in again to speak. And the other thing that they did at Genomic Health was they had beautiful pictures of different patients hung up throughout the hallways of the building.
Mm.
So you were always reminded it's always about the patient first. And then with the Genomic Health also had core 4 key values. They were winning, being ahead of the curve, integrity, and truth seeking. Okay. And
Mm.
I think those, especially for me, the integrity and truth seeking were the ones that really resonated, and made it possible for us to really create a wonderful, effective product. Okay.
Mm.
Um, After I left Genomic Health, the overall environment started to change a little bit. This was when more labs started doing sequencing. Okay, there was just a
Mm.
lot more data. Okay, and with that, I think there was also we needed more people with expertise in data science, bioinformatics, AI, and machine learning, and that started really to influence the healthcare space.
Yeah.
So at Guardant, um, that was where I first had more exposure to. That was what the first place where we did a lot more NGS. At Genomic Health, we were doing more qPCR. So we were working with vast amounts of data. So there was, I
Mm,
would say, more of a tech influence there.
mm,
Um, we, we were with Guardant Health, we didn't have as much funding. Okay. So I would say we were pretty scrappy. And I'm like super, super proud of the work we did there. When I joined, I believe I was employee number 18. Okay.
mm,
And one of the proudest accomplishments was working with the person who was heading the lab operations and a couple of people that we had worked previously at other labs on both in the lab and on the quality side. I was so super proud that we were able to go from gain CLIA certification to CAP accreditation in about 4 months. Okay,
mm,
we worked like crazy people, but it was with people that I enjoyed working with and that we trusted. But we trusted each other. We had we had core values in common, but different areas of specialty. Okay. And we were
mm,
able to accomplish something that I, I'm, I'm very proud of, and something that I will take away from Guardant and remember. Okay. Because
mm,
we were able to do so much in such a short amount of time and limited resources. Okay. Which was very different from GRAIL. Right. GRAIL, um, the first day I joined, I believe there were 50 people. Okay. I I I think I was one of maybe 5 or 6 people who did not come over from Illumina.
right.
Okay. So right off the bat, it was a very different experience. I Instead of being an early employee or right off the bat on day one, 50 people, and Grail had raised over $1 billion. Okay. So the culture was different. The in terms of the amount of resources we had, but the focus there was also very much about doing the best to develop and put a high quality LDT on the market, okay, to be able to help patients.
Yeah. It's interesting how different they all were. And I love that because I think there's not just one way to win, but I think there's, sometimes companies have to know what they are, especially at that early stage. You can't try and be everything and what everyone else does. But if you know what you want to be and you stick to that, then that can be well, it is a lot more powerful. Um, we're going to talk about your specialism in setting up CLIA labs and ensuring the success of those. But before we do, you mentioned you're about to launch this new venture, Tiger Team. What do you want to give us a little bit of an insight into what that is and what you'll be doing?
Oh, sure. So when what was happening when I started consulting was I'm working with early stage startups. Okay. So I'm
Yeah.
helping them with the CLIA lab piece. Okay. But the company maybe needed help also in other areas, whether it was reimbursement or helping with design of the analytical and the clinical validation studies. Okay. And so they would often ask me for recommendations, and I would recommend the folks that I had worked with at previous companies who were also now consultants. And that happened multiple times with different clients. And it became where we're friends, we're colleagues, we have shared values, we have a track record of being able to build really good companies and really good products, and there's a trust there. And we really enjoy working with each other. And so that was the idea of, well, let's form this new organization, Tiger Team, to be able to help these startups be able to get to market faster. Okay,
Mm.
we're combining strategic consulting with a venture creation piece, to be able to help these startups get these high quality diagnostics out to patients sooner.
Fantastic. Sounds like a great venture. So, congratulations on the 5 years of Carrot Clinical. It's. I mean, don't they say something like? Isn't it like 95% of all companies fail to get to 5 years? So, that it's something like that. That's an achievement in itself. You should be really proud. Um, so let's talk about the work you've been doing since you decided to go out on your own, because now you must have this incredible perspective helping so many sort of different companies work through these challenges. So give us the insight into what you've been doing with Carrot and the sort of the type of work and who you've been working with.
Sure. Again, most of my clients are startups.
Hmm.
Um, so while as an employee, before I started consulting, most of the work was in the oncology and genomic space. Okay. Since I started consulting, I've been able to work with a broader range of clients. So doing types of testing that I hadn't been exposed to since I was doing my CLS training many, many
Hmm.
years ago. Um, the the core work that I do as far as helping with lab operations, setting up the quality programs, and getting the regulatory credentials, for example, most of that it doesn't matter that what type of test the lab is offering, right? Because
Right.
whether whether you're offering hematology or a chemistry test, you still need to get a CLIA certification. Okay.
Hmm.
So the qualifications for the personnel might be a little bit different. Okay. But on the whole, it's generally the same process. Okay. And then specifically with the quality system, all labs need a quality system, and the components of the quality system are basically the same. Okay. I mean, if you ask anybody, do you want quality? I don't think you're going to find anybody who's going to say no. We don't want quality, but what is it? Okay, a lot of people are not quite sure what it is and how do you measure it. Okay, so specifically in a lab with a quality system, um, it's so I break it down in order to make it easy to understand. Uh, I explain it using remembering the five M's. Okay, so the M's are man or human or woman. Okay, your machine, materials, method, and monitoring. Okay. So with the man, it's all about the people. Okay. Making sure that the folks who are running the test are qualified, they're trained, that they're competent to do what they need to do, and that there's a culture of quality throughout the organization. Okay.
Hmm.
With machine, it's making sure that your equipment are qualified before you start using them, that you appropriately maintain them. Okay. And if there's any issue that they're addressed, you take it out of service if you need to. And with your machine, um, now that there's so much more bioinformatics and AI, this applies to your software too. So it's making sure that your software is working. With your materials, those revolve around reagents and consumables. Okay. So making sure, for example, when you get a new lot in or a new shipment, making sure that it works as you expect it in your tests and that nothing happened to it during the shipping process. Okay. With your method, making sure that your test is properly validated. Okay. That you've got SOPs in place so that it's being performed correctly. And then the fifth M around monitoring, it's measuring your quality indicators. Okay, it's having things like dot control in place, so everybody is using the same SOPs. For example, that they're approved, that changes are approved before they're implemented, that folks are trained. It's having a nonconformance and CAPA corrective and preventive action program in place. Also, things like training, internal audits, proficiency testing, and quality quality meetings with the appropriate stakeholders to go through all of the KPIs, the key performance indicators, to make sure that your system is performing as expected, and if it isn't, making adjustments as necessary, and also just identifying areas to improve in.
Mm.
Okay.
When you go into a company, Julie, for the first time, and they invite you in, and and they need your services, are they often starting from zero in terms of knowing they want a fully operational, functioning, high quality CLIA lab, but do they already know a bit and have built some of the foundations or taken steps, or are they going, we've got nothing and we need to bring in someone to get this going? Where are they usually when you enter?
A combination. So I'll work with some startups who are super, super early. Okay. So they're still trying to figure out, is there a there, right? Or if they do have something interesting, maybe they're thinking about, well, do we make it a device and take the FDA path? Or do we build a lab and offer it as an LDT and take the CLIA path? And when it's early stage like that, I'm having conversations with them about, what is CLIA, helping them understand um, how a service in a CLIA lab differs, for example, from a device that is regulated by the FDA that is sent to multiple labs, for
Mm,
example. Okay, and what the different requirements are, how to validate an LDT. And then there are some companies that are a little bit farther along. Okay, maybe they know that they want to build a CLIA lab, and they have an LDT that they know that they want to get on the market, and they might even have uh, one or two quality people or CLSs already, but maybe they don't have the experience of doing it from the beginning, from scratch, and so that's where I partner with them to help them be able to get their CLIA certifications, their CAP accreditations, their New York approvals, um, to validate their LDTs and making sure that they do all the required studies and then helping them launch.
and so when you join these companies, what's the common mistakes you're seeing? What are they getting wrong at that stage, or what are their, even if they haven't done anything yet, what are the sort of misled assumptions that they have in place of how they could proceed?
I'd say a couple of the challenging areas, there's a couple. The two I'd say that stand out to me, the first is related to development and the validation of the LDT.
Mm,
Okay. I think companies often underestimate the amount of time it takes to develop the tests and to validate it. Okay. So it's one thing, for example, to do some research experiments, okay, on maybe, let's say, 10, 20 specimens, okay, and it looks like it's good to go, okay, versus running it in a lab, in a CLIA lab, where you may be testing tens or hundreds or thousands of specimens per
mm,
day and doing it indefinitely.
mm,
Okay. So you want to make sure that the test that you're developing, there are robust processes in place so that if you start out manual, for example, that at some point you can scale, that you're able to automate it. Okay. If you are doing it manually, are are your operators able to do it? Okay. Are all your operators able to do it the same way? Okay. So all goes into the development process. With validation, similarly, with the development process, I think it's underestimating the amount of time and effort required it takes to validate. Just even planning the studies that need to be done, okay, takes time. Making sure that you're able to find the appropriate specimens for the studies, okay, and then documenting everything.
mm,
I'd say that's where I've often seen where someone will bring me on and say, well, we're ready to launch, or we're ready to validate. Okay. And I go in, and it'll probably take another 2 years before the test actually gets to market.
2 years. I thought you were going to say a few months, but because ultimately that most companies are probably in commercialization mode, right? They're thinking, right, we're going to get our LDT validated, we're going to start generating revenue, and even right now in this landscape where companies are having to do it to generate revenue because there's less access to capital. So the LDT route is just, everybody is trying to generate revenue through LDTs. So companies are going in. How long do they think it's going to take, and how long is it actually taking to validate on average?
For a typical LDT, okay, not and I mean, most of my experience are with oncology LDTs,
Okay.
but even the ones that aren't in oncology, or the ones that don't involve NGS, okay, um, the validation process. So I think most folks, for example, know that they have to do accuracy and precision studies, for example, okay, and sensitivity and specificity. Um, what companies sometimes pay a little bit less attention to are the pre-analytical steps. Okay. So the specimen collection device, okay,
Mm,
even if you're using a device that maybe is FDA cleared, okay, it was FDA cleared for whatever is written on that IFU. Okay.
mm,
You're using that device for your LDT. Okay, so you have to verify that it works for your LDT. So it's about testing that device and making sure that, for example, verifying the expiration date. Okay, if it's got a 1 year expiration date on it, does that 1 year hold with your test? Okay.
mm,
Similarly, once you've let's say it's a blood test. Okay, you've collected your blood in this device, and you have to ship it to the lab. Okay, you have to do shipping studies. Does it hold up when it's freezing outside, or sitting on an airport runway and it's 150 degrees? Okay, and how long can it stay in that device before you have to test? Okay, so it's
mm.
including those types of studies. It's also, as you're planning out these validation studies, um, making sure that you thought through. So using the example of the specimen type. Okay, it may be during the development process. Okay, you're using banked plasma specimens. Okay, to do your studies, because it's what you have available. Okay,
Mhm.
but for your actual test, if it turns out that you're collecting specimens, and you're going to be testing also with plasma. Okay, are you doing it with fresh plasma, or, since all your studies and maybe your validation was done with frozen plasma, okay, are you adding a freezing step to your actual commercial product to make sure that your process and the actual launched LDT is identical to what you validated? Because it could be that there is a difference. Um, that freezing step does something to the specimens, or does something to the test that is different from fresh plasma. So it's like sorting through all of those details. That's what makes um, these validation studies so important, and why it often takes longer than people anticipate.
So is the biggest repercussion of poorly planned setups time, in that things just slide, and ultimately launches and being operational just get pushed back more and more and more, depending on how ill prepared companies are to go through this process?
I found that most of the time, uh, it's people don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is doing anything deliberate. Okay. But if you've got somebody who's, you know, really super smart, okay, like they were smart enough to, to find some interesting and new novel technology and come up with an idea for a brilliant test, okay, but maybe they don't have the experience of 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 how to operationalize it or how to validate it, okay? I think that's where it's really important to bring people in who have the expertise and the experience in doing that, especially for startups, okay? Because, it's things you have to do things quickly. You have to do things without a ton of resources or money, okay? So I think it's really important early on to bring folks who have the experience. Okay, yes, they may cost a little bit more, okay, than folks who don't have that experience, but what you pay for for that person's salary, you'll more than make up the difference in because they're going to be able to come in and immediately see what needs to be done, where the gaps are, and execute. Okay. And then I think once you have that foundation in place, then sure, bring in the folks who maybe don't have experience, but are motivated and committed and energized to do it and start training and mentoring them.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting challenge that we hear across different areas within the industry. You know, I always hear the big one around reimbursement and the companies that don't address reimbursement strategy early and they one day think we need to start that, and it's like, yeah, that's now going to take 7 years. And they're like, shocked by it. And it almost, it's like all roads point back to the founders and the founding teams mentality on, are they in a do they have the mindset to gather consensus and admit they don't know things, right? And it's okay to not know what you don't
Right.
know, to your point. Or do they have the ego and arrogance and lack humility to be able to go, we don't know that, we should just ask someone and try and bring some sort of um expert in. It everything seems to point back to the, the yes or no of the founding team's mentality. Um, what's the best strategies to ensure that when companies are preparing for this process, that they're in a good position and things can go smoothly?
I'm going to go back to the people. I think the people are so important. Who you bring in, especially at the beginning of a startup, getting the right expertise in place so it's clear what needs to be done, how to get it done, identifying where there are other needs. Okay. So I think as an example, when I'm working with an early stage startup, okay, and we're having discussions about the lab, okay, one of the questions might be, well, where do you want to locate the lab, okay? Because there could be reimbursement consequences. Now, I'm not a reimbursement expert, okay,
Mm.
but it's something where I know it could impact the company's strategy. Okay, so I'll give my 2 cents from a CLIA perspective about these are the things to consider about, as far as where to start your lab. Okay, because there are some labs um, that are a little bit easier to get your CLIA certification because there's less regulatory hurdles. Other labs that are a little bit more challenging. Okay, but then you also want to think about um, the ability to hire people. Okay, and that's where there may be differences also in where you locate the lab.
Mm.
And then it's okay, reimbursement. Are you in a Novitas region, for example? Okay, and how soon do you want to get reimbursement? And what type of tests do you have? Because that could impact how quickly you get to market and start getting paid.
Julie, in your opinion, and you and I have had conversations about this offline, but in your opinion, how easy is it to hire and get the right people into a lab? Is that an easy process where companies, are they just putting adverts out on LinkedIn and suddenly they've got their guys, or is that a really hard hurdle for companies to get over?
Hiring is challenging. Okay? Hiring the right people is
Yeah.
challenging. Um, and sometimes companies don't put in as much um, effort or research as they should. Okay. Um, it's as an example, okay, in California, CLSs, they're hard to find.
Hmm.
Okay. And I've been in this situation myself where we really needed people. Okay. Um, and I ended up hiring somebody that was very good. Okay. But not the right fit for a startup environment.
Mm,
Okay. And having to work through that situation, okay, took away from the focus of being able to build other parts of the lab and working on the LDT. Um, and so that caused a delay in some things, okay, in
mm,
our ability to meet certain deadlines because the pair of hands that we were counting on, um, we weren't able to get that work done.
mm,
So this is where I would say spend the extra time to hire, to vet people, and no matter how difficult it may be, okay, to live with a gap because you really need the hands, okay, I'd
mm,
say think carefully about just hiring somebody to fill the role, okay, if it's not the right person to fill that role.
mm. Again, because of the problems it causes down the line and delays.
Yes.
Julie, we can't go through every state individually on its pros and cons, but California, the assumption would be it has a really robust laboratory network, established laboratory network that have been built, been operational, and therefore has a large bandwidth of experienced personnel that new labs could tap into and try and bring on board. What's the trade-off in terms of the pros and cons in a California and deciding to put your new CLIA lab in California versus going to another state with a less established laboratory network, but you probably have less competition in that state, and also economically is probably, the rumors are probably up to a third cheaper to operate, right? So what's the sort of pros and cons that companies should consider when choosing location to put their lab?
Sure. So for some states where you only need the CLIA certification. So CLIA certification is a federal requirement. So every lab in every state
Yeah.
requires CLIA certification. Some labs don't. Some states don't require an additional state lab license. Okay. So then the process for applying for CLIA certification is you fill in your CMS 116 form, the most basic form, submit it, and you'll get your CLIA certification, your certificate of registration, which allows you to start patient testing within 2 to 3 weeks. Versus a state like California, once you the process for submitting your CLIA application, there's more forms that are required. Okay. California also requires a California clinical lab license. So there's also state forms that you need to fill out. And once you submit it, there's what they'll do is they'll review all the documents. They'll reach out to the lab and ask for supporting documentation. Okay, one of the
Mm,
things they focus on is making sure that personnel are qualified. Okay, so they'll
mm,
check the lab director's credentials, the supervisors, all the testing personnel, making sure that they have the appropriate experience and the training.
mm,
And if whether it's an FDA clear test or an LDT, they'll ask for either the verification or the validation documents and look at them
mm,
before they issue the clear certificate and the California lab license. Okay, so like when one person's pro is another person's con, so it's all how you look at it. If the goal, okay, so let's say a startup had a goal of, well, we need to get CLIA certification in order to meet a milestone to get the next funding round. Okay, sure, then maybe you go to a state that's less regulated. Okay,
mm,
but if you do it through California, you will know because they've gone through your documents. Okay, you will have an objective set of eyeballs, for example, that have looked through your qualifications to make sure that personnel are qualified and your validation documents. Okay,
mm,
which then, if let's say you are also working towards reimbursement, okay, you've got something there already.
mm.
Okay, does that make
So,
sense?
yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
So California short-term pain in terms of the documentation and process, but ultimately the once it's set up and live in the eyes of everybody for the long term, you have a really well established and well maintained process and lab. So that makes sense. Is it becoming more or less common for companies to choose a California? Because cost is everything at the moment, right? It has been for a few years. So probably for like 3 years, cost has been everybody's number one decision making criteria. Have you seen that in the 5 years of Carrot that people's decision making process is changing in terms of where they launch labs, and are they moving away from California in search of more economical establishments?
So I've seen some who came specifically to California, specifically actually the Bay Area, because there are so many biotech companies in the
Right,
area. So it's a little bit easier to hire the
right.
personnel that you need. Okay. At the same time, because a lot of the testing is shifting towards distributive model labs and dry labs. So distributive model labs are where wet lab testing is done by a referral lab. Okay, and then your primary lab is maybe focused on just the analytical, the like a dry lab piece. Okay, um, since there are more labs taking that route, I have seen more labs doing that outside of California. Now, part of the issue with that is that the regulations haven't kept up with the pace of everything that's happening on the innovation and the technology side. Okay, and so as an example, CMS, who they administer CLIA, hasn't been completely aligned on how to treat these dry labs. Okay. So there's some labs in one region, for example, where they apply and get their CLIA certification right away, no questions asked. Okay.
Mm,
I've also seen one lab where when they asked CMS, do we need CLIA certification? The response was no, unless you want to be reimbursed. Okay. And right now in California, I believe they're not issuing CLIA certificates to dry labs. And so that's where there's an inconsistency in how regulations are being applied right now, which adds to the uncertainty for what companies needs to do. And as a result, companies are setting up their dry labs out not in California.
mm. Do you see continued changes on the regulatory side over the next few years?
Well, so the regulatory environment is definitely still evolving. So the last, I'm going to say decade has been super interesting in that just so much has happened. Um, so the Ballot Act was first introduced, I think, back in 2018. Okay,
Yeah,
so there was a lot of talk about Ballot Act. It ended up stalling. It didn't get passed in Congress, and I don't think anything's going to happen with that anytime soon.
yeah,
We just went through a 2-year saga with the FDA LDT rule, which is now vacated and no more.
yep,
Okay, which then, I mean, just based on that, you think on the surface, okay, it's clear, LDT labs can continue to offer LDTs. Um, like back in the old days, before all of this started, I don't think that's the case. Um, the there's still uncertainty, okay, around for things like specimen collection kits and software,
mm,
okay? Because those two items FDA does regulate, okay? So things that a lab does with their LDTs could still trigger some FDA oversight. But a lot of this is it's not completely clear um, how it's going to be regulated or what FDA is going to do, if anything, given the current environment. At least for the next couple of years, I think it will probably be status quo, but you never know.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of companies that are obviously building their commercialization strategy based on the current standing, right? And things can change, like say in a couple of years, and then people are going to have to deal with that. So it's going to be interesting, isn't it, to see what happens? What's from your perspective, what's your outlook on you've been in and around diagnostics and worked with some great companies, and now you get to work with loads of startups. And what's your outlook on the diagnostics industry objectively over the next couple of years?
I mean, it's tough right now, right? Just for startups just trying to keep their doors open because
Yeah,
they're not getting investments. The grants aren't necessarily available.
yeah,
Um, at the same time, because they are going to this distributive and dry lab model, they don't necessarily need as much capital.
mm-hmm,
So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and what happens with the regulations. Yeah, with the other thing with the regulations, after this whole thing with the FDA in March ended, I was hoping that CMS would use this time to modernize and update CLIA. So the clinical was it Clinical Laboratory Improvement Advisory Committee, also called CLIAC. Okay, they're a committee. They meet twice a year. They've been doing this since the early 1990s, I believe. So almost 3 decades. The purpose of this committee is to provide technical and scientific guidance on CLIA. So I was hoping that in March, after the FDA LDT rule was vacated in court, that CLIAC would take that opportunity to start working on updating CLIA. However,
mm,
the committee was disbanded in March,
mm,
which is just an unfortunate timing. Um, so there's going to be this continued regulatory uncertainty.
yeah.
Um, Investors don't like uncertainty, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Now you're working with more and more startups, right? Simultaneously. Do you feel that pain more? Do you see it when you're talking to startup founders and the people in charge? Are you seeing their pain more and more, or do you see relief on their side where they think is there now increased optimism compared to say 6 or 12 months ago?
Because the FDA LDT rule is no more.
And just objectively, just in terms of as as time moves on.
S Really, things have just been so challenging the last couple of years that even when all of this, FDA LDT rule was happening, it was for the really early stage startups, okay, it was, like, nowhere on their radar because they were just so focused on doing enough fundraising to keep the company going that they didn't even have time to worry about it, so,
Yeah.
great, now there's one less thing to worry about, but I don't think the investment, environment has gotten any easier for them. So it's still been challenging. I've talked to so many early stage companies where there's some interesting things happening, like some interesting tests, interesting technology. Um, but it'll be TBD to see if they ever get to market because it's just been so tough.
Yeah, 100%. And when you're in them tough conditions, to go back to one of the points you made, which is so important, um, when you're in those tough conditions, people choose not to, maybe because they don't have the resources to do so, but they choose to not bring in the expertise early, leave it till the last moment. Doesn't matter if it's from your perspective and validating an LDT, or a commercialization strategist, a market access strategist, somebody who can come in and just set them guidelines early and get ahead of things. Companies avoid it because they maybe intentionally, maybe they're focused on other things, maybe they just don't have the resources. So it has those knock-on effects on early stage businesses. Um Julie, this was awesome. I love that, for me, what I've really learned is how significant being ill prepared for setting up a CLIA lab and launching as an LDT can have a profound effect on the actual time to launch. And we're talking years. I mean, that's fascinating. And also how people need to assess the where they're going to put a lab, and ultimately the people that are going to lead it, because that's just so important to the quality of it and its operations. And again, that can cause delays later on if you get that wrong. Um, Thank you, Julie. Is there anything else you wanted to add that we potentially haven't mentioned?
I would say one thing, yeah, I don't want this conversation to be, totally negative and how hard and challenging it's been.
I didn't think it was
Yeah,
that. I do
the couple
apologize
of,
to
no,
Julie.
no, no need for you to apologize. I think it's just what I've been talking about. I keep talking about how tough it is out there and how
Mm,
challenging it is and how there's so much regulatory uncertainty. Uh, the good things I'm seeing, okay, and one thing I'm really happy about is the growing awareness just of diagnostics and CLIA labs. I think a lot of this came out of COVID-19, where you
mm,
were hearing in the news things like CLIA and clinical laboratory scientists. Yeah, I would say, pre-COVID, if I went to some industry event, most people have, when I said CLIA or CLS, they had no idea what I was talking about. I never even heard of the acronym.
wow.
Okay. Now, when I go to industry events, in a room of maybe 100 people, 5 to 10 people will now know. It's still a small percentage, but it's way better than it used to be.
Mm,
The other thing is that there's also been a growing focus on women's health.
mm,
Okay, I'm seeing more companies focused on women's health that they're developing diagnostics that are specifically for women and
yep.
women conditions. They're using women specific specimens and women specific devices. So I'm very encouraged by that.
I think that's awesome. Unfortunately, women's health is still a really underfunded part of diagnostics, but it absolutely is getting more and more attention. And I've even been working with investors who are only interested in women's health. So that, which is
That's
a
great.
really good sign. They've got a passion
Oh,
for pushing that forward. So yeah, I agree with you on that one, Julie. Well, Julie, thank you so much. Your insight is incredibly valuable, and I'm looking forward to putting this out, and hopefully some, early stage companies and founders pick it up and they hear it and they think, right, I've got to take a look at this before it's too late. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your perspective.
thank you so much for having me on today, David. I really enjoyed our conversation. And I also wanted just to thank you for, excuse me, for creating these podcasts. Because I've listened to them. I think they're informative. I've learned things from listening to them. It's really valuable content for the community. So thank you again for doing this. And I'm glad I could contribute. And I look forward to hearing future episodes.
Thank you so much, Julie.